This is an introduction to the book by Manly Palmer Hall called The Wisdom of the Knowing Ones, Gnosticism, the Key to Esoteric Christianity. And I will be covering in this video just the introduction to Manly Palmer Hall's book. The image on this slide is called Abraxas. This name was coined by Basilides, the Egyptian Gnostic. It is a word symbol consisting of 7 letters, which signify the 7 creative powers or planetary angels recognized by the ancients. Samson Arnold McKay's theory is that the name was created from 2 ancient words, abir, which means a bull, and axis, which means pole. To substantiate his belief, he says that the motion of the earth, called the alternation of the poles, resulted in the vernal equinox taking place at one time in Taurus, the celestial bull, over the North Pole. The 4 white horses drawing the chariot of Abraxas symbolize the 4 ethers by means of which the solar power, Abraxas, is circulated through all parts of the universe. The 7-lettered name of Abraxas is symbolically significant of his 7-rayed power. Manly P. Hall's book, Wisdom of the Knowing Ones, examines the relationship of Gnostic mysticism to the inner teachings of Plato, Valentinus, Basilides, and in the culture of ancient Alexandria. If any group possessed the esoteric secrets of the early church, it was the Gnostics. The early church attacked Gnosticism vigorously and relentlessly because these mystical philosophers were the most formidable adversaries to the temporal power of the Christian church. How do we know what the Gnostics were about? In December 1945, an Egyptian Arab man made a very important archaeological discovery in Upper Egypt. The exact location of where he made his find was concealed, but it is generally agreed it was somewhere near modern Nag Hammadi. During early Christian times, this was a very large monastic community. The discovery that Muhammad Ali made was a large, red earthenware jar. Inside the jar were 13 books made of papyrus and bound in leather. This was the discovery of what has become known as the Nag Hammadi Library. It is the collection of Gnostic treatises. Less than a year later, the Dead Sea Scrolls were unearthed at Qumran. Qumran, in Arabic, Kermet Qumran, its ancient name is unknown, is located on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea, several kilometers south of Jericho. In a cave in the Judean desert cliffs south of Qumran, Bedouins in 1947 found the first Dead Sea Scrolls. The Nag Hammadi find contained the teachings of the early Christian schools of Gnostics. The Dead Sea Scrolls contained the writings of heterodox Jewish mystics of a slightly earlier time. However, it appears that the 2 groups had similarities. This raises the question of, did a secret tradition of esoteric religion exist that was previously unknown? Several groups of esoteric scholars have always believed in such a tradition. These groups included the Cathars, Rosicrucians, Knights Templar, Esoteric Freemasons, and Theosophists. Individuals in these groups considered themselves part of an esoteric tradition that could be traced back to the initiates of the Gnostics and the Essenes, as well as to the Neoplatonists and the initiates of the Egyptian Hermes. Manly P. Hall wrote extensively about this adept tradition. What other sources of information do we have on the Gnostic tradition? Before the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls, our main sources of information on the teachings and practices of the Gnostics was the Church Fathers of the Catholic Church. However, the purpose of their writings were to attack the beliefs and practices of the Gnostics. These writers were called heresiologists because they were investigating what the church defined as heresy. So the question becomes, how accurate are these accounts of the Church Fathers? The Church Fathers attacked the message of the Gnostic teachers and ridiculed their belief system. However, a few original Gnostic documents survive that were carried to Europe by travelers from the Middle East. This meant that scholars no longer had to rely only on the writings of the Church Fathers for information on the Gnostic tradition. Books were written by German, English, and French scholars that were read and studied. In addition, Madame Blavatsky and G.R.S. Mead also stimulated interest in this field of study. Eventually, the Gnostic Church was reconstituted and continues to the present day in several different forms. However, even the writings of these scholars paled in comparison to the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library. It sparked new research, especially because there were so many documents to study that had been previously unknown. What then do we know about the teachings and practices of the Gnostics? The introduction to Manly P. Hall's book on Esoteric Christianity lists several main topics: the knowers and the knowledge, the Gnostic worldview, the cosmology of the Gnostics, the Gnostic concept of deity, the Gnostic view of the human being, and the nature of Gnosis. The term Gnosis derives from the Greek word gnosis, or knowledge, especially of spiritual matters. This is not the type of knowledge that one gains through philosophical and intellectual reasoning. It is more akin to what we term insight, meaning we gain knowledge intuitively. There were many Gnostic schools of thought, as this was a diverse movement. All had some characteristics in common, however. The uniting factor was a common dedication to the founder of Christianity, Jesus Christ. However, it is important to point out that the basic Gnostic view of reality was shared by people who were not Christians. These Hermeticists looked up to the figure of the Greco-Egyptian Hermes as their savior. Jewish scholar Gershom Scholem also described a type of Jewish Gnosticism that may be more properly be termed Merkaba mysticism. This is what later developed into the Jewish Kabbalah. In addition, the Essenes are also connected to the early Gnostic tradition. The great psychologist Carl Jung studied and wrote about Gnosticism. He made the suggestion that the writings of the Gnostics came from the mystical experiences of the practitioners. Other scholars also picked up on this theme and wrote about Gnosticism as mystically inspired religious mythology. Are myths merely stories, or are they a vehicle for communicating profound truths? I think probably the great Gnostic teachers such as Valentinus, Basilides, and others were inspired by mystical experiences. Therefore, I disagree with the characterization of their works as heretical. Of course, the Church regarded their teachings as heresy, but remember, the Church could not allow its dogma to be questioned, lest it lose its hold over the hearts and minds of the members. The Church had a lot to lose, and its power and authority could not be questioned. This is likely the reason why the Church did not want the teachings of the Gnostics to spread. What was the Gnostic worldview? Gnostics tried to explain why the world is flawed. Of course, other religious belief systems have their own explanations for why this is so. As for the Gnostics, however, they concluded this was so because the world was created in a flawed manner. In their view, this was the cause of suffering. Gnostics believed this was an inherent part of the way the world was made. The only way to remedy this, they thought, would be through the raising of consciousness through the insight of Gnosis. What was the Gnostic concept of God? The Gnostics were influenced by the image of the monotheistic God of the Old Testament and by the New Testament as well. This God created the universe and also worked within it as well as a lawgiver, judge, and even executioner. This deity did not always act in a logical manner, though, and sometimes even acted out of anger and wrath. How did the Gnostics explain this? They answered this question by saying that the Creator depicted in the Scriptures was not, in fact, the ultimate true God. The God of the Old Testament was, in fact, what they termed a demiurgos, or craftsman of the universe. He was only an intermediate or secondary deity, and that above him existed a true, ultimate, real, and good God. This God, they believed, could be experienced through Gnosis. What have we learned from the recently discovered Gnostic text? The Gnostics believed in the concept of duality in the world. They thought that human nature mirrors this duality. This means that human nature was in part made by the false creator, but also contained the light of the true God. And this light they called a divine spark. Humans are mostly not aware that they possess this divine spark, so the knowledge or gnosis must be awakened within them. In order to awaken this divine presence, the human must overcome many powerful obstacles that are built into not only human nature, but are also inherent within the environment. Author Elaine Pagels, who has written about Gnosticism, says that the Apostle Paul may have believed that the obstacles that block the way to Gnosis are connected to aspects of the universe who have dominion over humans. She says that this may have been what the Apostle Paul was referring to when he wrote that we struggle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and spiritual wickedness in high places. Gnostics taught that the divine spark is trapped in man's physical body during the time of his life on earth. In other words, it's imprisoned there in the flesh and is only released upon death of the physical vehicle. However, if the human does not attain the liberating knowledge of Gnosis, this release may be only temporary. One of the largest points of contention between Gnosticism and Orthodox Christianity had to do with the essential nature of the human being and why the Gnostics were branded as heretics by the church. Gnosticism looks upon men and women as gods and goddesses who have forgotten who they are. They have forgotten because of the limitations of their physical environment. This ignorance of origins, of true nature, and of ultimate destiny made it crucial for the Gnostic to free himself through Gnosis. This doctrine illustrates why Gnostics were branded as heretical by the Catholic Church. An early Gnostic statement defines the nature of Gnosis this way: humans must seek the following information in order to achieve Gnosis: who we were, what we have become, where we were, wherein we have been cast, whereto we are hastening, of what we are being freed, what birth really is, and what rebirth really is. Once an individual intuitively receives accurate answers to these questions, he or she is liberated through Gnosis. Ignorance only keeps us enslaved, but Gnosis sets us free. Gnostics also taught in order to free ourselves from this slavery, we need to work on ourselves and to seek aid in this endeavor. Where Orthodox Christians believe that Jesus incarnated in order to achieve their salvation, Gnostics believed that Jesus came into the world to liberate the seeker through Gnosis. The Gnostics taught that from earliest times, messengers of light have come forth the true God in order to help in this regard, and these messianic figures are mentioned in various Gnostic scriptures. Jesus was only one of these messengers of light. While Orthodox Christians sought salvation through sin, Gnostics desired release from unconsciousness and ignorance of spiritual realities. For this reason, for the Gnostic liberation is a potent potential in every individual. The great messengers of light help to stimulate this potential, not through their death, but through their lives. The messengers of light bring teaching to enlighten the hearts and minds of men and also confer liberating mysteries upon him or her. 2,000 years ago, the Gnostic movement was the stone that the builders rejected. Manly Palmer Hall does not accept this way of thinking about Gnosticism, however. Instead, he puts forth the thesis that Gnosticism is the key to esoteric Christianity.